Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And I know it's a tough to follow such a great lunch, so hopefully we'll try to keep it light and insightful and hopefully a little bit entertaining. I had a great pleasure to meet Bill last night, actually, and I realized we have three things in common, right? One is that I think both of us have a little bit of an accent. Number two is that we are sporting a very aerodynamic hairstyle, both of us. Proud, right? And number three is I think we're sharing the passion for sustainable business models and sustainable supply chains. And I'll share maybe just to kick us off my background, where my passion is coming from, and then I'll ask Bill to share his. I started my career 25 years ago in a software industry, and I started in a software domain that was helping customers make better decisions. And why making better decisions is good for the planet is because it helps companies operate more efficiently and with less waste, and that's good for the environment. Bill, how about you? What drove your passion?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, first of all, and I'll try to keep you awake after your lunch. What drove me was, look, I have a Scottish accent. I'm from Scotland, grew up in the apparel industry when it still all happened in the UK. The stuff that was sold in the UK was made in the UK. The model was completely different at that time. But I grew up in manufacturing. So as much as, my most recent career has been, head of operations, supply chain at Victoria's Secret, head of supply chain at Walmart for a number of their divisions there, and most recently at PVH. Actually, I'm grounded on the supply chain side. That's where I come from, moved to live in China in 1990. At the request of a very large retailer here in the UK, asked me if I would move over there with the brief of build first world manufacturing in a third world location. And China was a third world location at that time. I'm not sure you'd describe it that way anymore. And I did that. I moved over there, and the model was completely different. It was stretched. I'll refer to some slides maybe later. I have a presentation that I'm going to keep pulling up a couple of slides. It was a presentation I gave in New York to the industry in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to pull up a couple of slides from that. But what drives me is the amount of waste and inefficiency within the supply chain that we've created between the manufacturing side and the retail side because of each other's ignorance. And I one of the few benefits I have is I've lived on both sides of that equation. In fact, just a little fun story for you. One of the first factories that I built in China, actually, its number one customer became Victoria's Secret stores. In fact, 98% of the product that we made in that facility went to Victoria's Secret stores. Advanced 2 years of my career, and I'm now executive vice president of Victoria's Secret stores in Columbus, Ohio. And I turned up at my first day at work, and I remember a lady who actually went on to be the CEO, a great company, lovely lady, but just interesting ditty. She came up to me and said, Bill, I'm glad you're with us now. You'll be able to now go and sort out all these suppliers that cause us all these problems. My response was, I didn't turn up here to sort out the suppliers. I turned up here to sort out you. Because they were the primary cause of the inefficiencies, the waste, and what they never actually understood is the vast majority of the excess cost that they paid for their product was actually their issue, not the supply chain issue. It was all embedded into the cost of business. And so over time, I got very passionate about how do you strip that out? And what I realized is they weren't wrong. They had challenges. The supply chain wasn't wrong. It had challenges. But we had this thing called false hierarchy, where somehow the retailer thought they were the most important thing and they dictated everything all the way down, and that hierarchy lasted. And all I tried to do was say, no, that it's about we're all peers. Everyone turned up today to do a good job. Everyone turned up today to make money. And if we actually start to work with each other, we can strip the waste and excess out of the system. And that's waste of people's time, waste of materials, waste of product, and actually allow everybody to be more profitable. And that's what we did at that time. So that's what drives me. And look, I would say I'm retired now. And so for every one of you that's still working, you are quite frankly constrained because you all need a job. You can be fired if you disagree with people. Nobody can fire me, right? I make no money. No one pays me. No one can fire me at this point. So when I left PVH, I was very clear that I was going to become an informed activist. And what I meant by that is not simply poke people for the sake of poking people, but actually advocate that there is a different model. The new model should be applied, and try to push our industry to apply the model faster than the little incremental itty-bitty steps that we're working through right now. And that's what I do. I work on different industry initiatives now to move that forward, all pro bono.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And Bill, I mean, I think two a little bit kind of opposing things going on, right? And our title of our session is Enabling Profitable and Sustainable Supply Chains, right? Sometimes profitability and sustainability don't go hand in hand. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so not in my world, it doesn't. There was a time where sustainability and profitability was almost a choice that I had to make. We left that world years ago, and it is almost a defensive mechanism for CEOs or for leaders of businesses that don't have the appetite to lean into change and risk, not to make a move, right? It's like, we've got to make a choice. There is no choice. What there is there's a hurdle that you've got to go over, right? So it says if you can make the leap to the other side of the equation where you've embraced ESG, because I will keep coming back to ESG. If you can embrace that, you're actually going to be more profitable because you're stripping the waste out of the system at every level of the way that you operate. It's the hurdle that people struggle with. Look, I would say to everybody, look at your current businesses. And I think what you saw is pre-pandemic, there was a lot of people on the journey to the new world, right? A more sustainable, embracive world. You had goals, etc. Then the pandemic hit. Then the Ukraine war happened. We have other stuff going on out there. Very quickly, people retreat back to not long-term financial models, otherwise you'd stay on the journey you were on. What they do is they retreat back to short-term financial needs, and they tend to eject those long-term plans for the sake of, I guess, in some cases, staying in business, not going bankrupt. In other cases, I think it's more a personal thing that people just don't want their businesses not to perform well. So I don't buy into any concept that being more sustainable requires you to be less profitable. There is a hurdle to get through, but that is the more you embrace that change, the faster you will pass through that hurdle.
Right. We are at a technology conference, so I wanted to maybe get your perspective on technology. If I look at the traditional supply chain planning technologies, right, we're focused mainly on optimizing either for service levels or for cost. Now we're saying maybe we need to optimize for emissions, for the footprint, right? What do you see as the most kind of exciting use cases, maybe in the apparel industry, to actually drive that?
So yes, all of what you just said, right? So I think that as I will touch on some slides in a second, but as we moved stuff offshore, we quite frankly dumbed the system down, right? I would say if you think back to the old days, and God, I'm at an age now where I use those terms, think back to the old days. If you think back to the old days, product was made in the UK for the UK. I was a big supplier to Marks and Spencer's in my time. Marks and Spencer's would call off on a weekly basis. We would only make the goods that same week that they called them off to replenish our warehouses. So there was minimum inventory in the system and almost immediate 1 week reactivity to anything that was being called off. As we stretched that supply chain, we got less and less accurate, less and less able to react. In fact, I just want to hit a couple of slides, right? So, I mean, you can see behind me a view that I have, and I'm pretty vocal about it, and anybody that follows me on LinkedIn, that I'm not sure all big companies will survive the transition that we are in. I think some of them will eventually fail because they're too big to succeed. And there's too much legacy that's in there. But if you think about what planning was trying to do, right? You look at the statement, from me a long time ago. In no time in history has the last customer willing to pay full price for an item walked into a store and bought the last item available at full price. So think of that as the crosshair of the target that we're aiming at. Well, when we made locally and were fast, we were still missing that crop. They've been missing it since Romans made togas, right? We're missing it. What happened was, now that we've got extended supply chains, we're throwing a dart and we're a mile off at this point. It got seriously worse. In fact, if you look at this graph, you can see during the period that the industry went through transitioning away from these more vertical structures that they had, just how department store markdowns increased dramatically. That is waste. That is landfill. Markdown product is generally the least used product to landfill, right? You may buy it, you may put it in your wardrobe, but in the apparel industry, you may well have product in your wardrobe that still has the label on it, and you decide you're going to give it to a charity shop. And the reason you bought it is not because you needed it, but you did it because it was cheap, and how could you not buy it? We have increased that throughout our industry that is out there. So basically, as we kind of move forward, and I just want to hit couple more slides. I'll come back to these, but look at this. Look at these headline articles that come out through the pandemic, right? What went on at Gap? They were airing in their good. There were inventory challenges. You don't have to read each of those, but just basically, these are from all the big news channels that are out there, the Financial Times, Bloomberg. They're all reporting on what's happening at the retail sector. None of those, not one of those articles talked about the ecological, environmental, or social impact that those things were causing. All they cared about was the financial aspect of the impact. When there were too many goods in the warehouse, waste was increasing. Remember that in the apparel sector, we are often considered the second dirtiest industry in the world. 98 million tons of waste to landfill every year, which is one trash refuse truck every second going to landfill full of waste. That's what we do. We had a chance to impact this. 25% of that waste is a planning issue. It is because we over-order and do not sell what we over-order. So you'll hear comments like sell-throughs of 75%. Well, when we went through the pandemic, that rocketed. We either had not enough inventory, in which case we were pushing factories to move up deliveries. We were air freighting goods in. Let me go back. I've got to go back a couple of slides. Look at this. These are CO2 emissions from a product that is moved by sea. And the actual shipment is about 1% of the carbon footprint. When you move it to air, it goes from 1% to 30% of the carbon footprint of an apparel item is caused by airing the goods. Any business that airs more than 2% of its product, that represents all of the balanced 98% of the product that it moved by sea. It is a horror story to air freight goods, and yet we were doing that everywhere. Not one article reported on the impact of that. Then there was a moment in that where we had way too much inventory. The UK retailers had a glut of inventory that they didn't know what to do with and were reporting it in their annual reports. Not once did people mention the social impact of that. So when we talk about ESG, for me, it's a capital E and a silent S and G. Everybody's talking environmental today. Nobody talks social. Nobody talks governance, right? Well, when there was a glut of inventory, orders were being cancelled, or orders that were forecasted were not being placed out there. No one took into consideration the devastation that was having on workers all through the supply, millions of workers all through the supply chain who were no longer able to make the earnings that they should have been making because they didn't turn up to work. And it's all caused by these extended supply chains that we have, planning capability that was dumbed right down, and we're now talking about improving that planning capability. But my caution on introducing new planning tools is that if those new planning tools, IBP processes, are for the retailers, the brands, and you're then trying to plug that into the same old supply chain that you had before, the outcome really isn't that different, slightly, but really isn't that different. If anything, you just get more frustrated. So my view is that if you really want to see a significant improvement, you have to dial up both sides of the equation. And I think there's an absolute lack of engagement from the supply side of this discussion. And as we try to improve this whole thing, environmental, social, lowering cost, lowering the need to carry the huge inventories that we're carrying in warehouses, that everybody's sitting there with their fingers crossed, hoping it may sell or may not sell. The opportunity is just huge. Again, think of that crosshair. The world we live in today is, on one side of it, about 25% of what we ordered is just too much. And we'll have to mark it down, liquidate it in some fashion. Years back, there were brands that were getting crushed because they were announcing they were burning their product or crushing their product in case of glasses out there. Terrible. What is sometimes missed is there's the other side of that equation, 25% of the product that they wish they had had more of, that they outsold. And that is a huge profitability margin loss caused by the length of the supply chain that's out there, not by the suppliers. I want to be very clear. I'm very much an advocate of the supply base. It's caused by the model that we've used for the last 30 years is redundant at this point. It should be destroyed. We use terms like MOQ, right? Completely fictitious term, by the way, made up by suppliers to protect themselves from dumb retailers out there. But we've got things like MOQ instead of OOQ, optimized order quantities, and they're completely different things. So we're just at a point where there's this need to radicalize and change the operating model. And we're coming at it too slowly, right? We're too cautious.
And Bill, I think we have a few minutes left, and I want to bring, you brought into stark focus really the fragility of these global supply chains that we have implemented. And I think you've introduced a concept called supply lattices. And I'd like you to maybe spend a few minutes describing what do you mean by that and how is that more resilient than just a...
Yeah, so I think and look, some of these exist in some companies already. When I was at Walmart, one of the things I triggered and then drove was reshoring, it was specifically in the electronics industry, but reshoring that into the US because we had proven that we didn't need to make it in Asia anymore. We could make it locally. Even though it was more expensive, it was more profitable because you could be reactive. So again, I'm going to show a quick slide to kind of back just some of this up for a second. So this idea of what we moved to was what I call a low and slow model, right? Big orders, purchase orders. Again, purchase orders is another concept that I think needs destroyed. It is a big speed bump in the process. But this is the model we use. It's typically one factory, one place in the world that makes one end product that we place a purchase order to 3, 4, 5 months in advance and keep our fingers crossed that it sells. And we have never hit the nail. We never got the target right. If If you fast forward, what we call MDDO supply network is really saying, actually, there's three capabilities. There's offshore, still critical, should still be the mainstay. There is nearshore, Turkey would be an example, Portugal would be an example for here. But there's also an onshore capability, and that's one of the things I work on, is what's called an onshore UK eco park, to set that up here for apparel. But it's by leveraging all three models for the exact same item. A lot of people have failed on their onshore processes by trying to bring whole products back onshore. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is there are SKUs, there are fringe fashion items that instead of ordering it all up front and getting a low price and then having to discount 25% of it, I can place some of it offshore and then hold fire and wait to see what the customer actually buys. Then react through a series of onshore and offshore models, pay significantly higher, right? So face the fact that you're going to pay more, but you will still be more profitable. I think one of the misses in our industry is this idea that my job is to get the lowest price, right? And some of the earlier conversations I thought were excellent, right? How do you give a KPI to a buyer or a merchant that actually drives profitability for an organization? And I think we've lost sight of that. I think sometimes we think getting the lowest cost for the item is the best thing. That's not what we're employed to do. What we're employed to do is to kind of drive profitability. And so if you simply use the offshore model, you get low cost, but you also get a low profitability. If you actually use all three models, you actually completely change it, where you actually pay more overall, but your profitability jumps significantly. And we've run the data on this a number of different ways to prove it. The challenge here is there is no planning system today capable of doing this. There is no dynamically optimized planning system that can manage time over cost through multiple locations and recognize all the variables, including material positioning, etc. So the tool set is preventing the physical get set up, and to some degree, the physical or lack thereof is presenting the tool set get set up. But this reduces waste, it addresses the social issue of these ups and downs, and it actually drives profitability for an organization. Again, the challenge is, how do I get from here to there?
And it sounds to me, right, I think you opened a presentation with talking about the need for collaboration between the retailers and the suppliers. Broadly, right, in the ESG space, there's, as you said, many more stakeholders, right? What do you think, what's your prediction for the next few years, right? How will this collaboration between the stakeholders evolve? And especially now, maybe with some regulations as well coming down the line as well. What do you think it's going to drive the...
Yeah, so I love, sorry to interrupt, but your point on regulations, right? So again, just to be maybe antagonistic, I do not believe we are waiting for the consumer to wake up one day and say, oh, I suddenly have this epiphany and I'm no longer going to buy apparel that's not made properly, right? It has to be green. That is not going to happen. And apparel just continues to grow at this rate. There are second-hand apparel lines coming into place, but we've got Asia to come up, India to come up, the African continent to come up, Europe and America to contribute 15% of the world's population. We've still got 85% of the world's population to come online buying apparel at that rate. The growth is huge. Legislation for me will be a great leveler, right? One of my biggest frustrations in life is trying to get retailers to come together in a pre-competitive environment to work together to say, we are all trying to solve these challenges that are out there. Like I'm working on an initiative with the Tony Blair Institute in West Africa to stand up a mass regeneration center, a new model for apparel to be built on. Everybody gets excited about it until you ask everybody to work together on it. Everybody wants to be different. Everybody thinks that they're unique. Nobody wants to work together on these things. And so for me, legislation is crucial to drive this forward. If you can get legislation that puts bright lines in the sand where people realize we have to work together if we're going to solve this problem. Because if the industry did work together, we could be tackling this at 10 to 20 times the rate that we're tackling it today. It is a big, but the last thing I would say on regulation, again, in my prior life, we retailed in 123 countries all over the world. One of the risks of legislation is different legislation in all these different countries. And then that could potentially make the problem more complicated if I have to differentiate the exact same item because of legislation needs that are different in all different countries. So there really needs to be kind of some center to legislation. I mean, I look at the EU as really the lead in that today. They're really driving the agenda. And I think the more other countries just say we will embrace the European agenda, the better, I think.
Thank you, Bill. That's our session for today. Thank you so much for so many insights. I think, can we make this as presentation available?
Yes, no, I would actually send you the larger presentation that goes into all of it a little bit more detail, but I was just pulling some of the slides out about the need in our industry.
Great. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.